JavaScript. When you first start, you have to learn the theory and you have to learn all these various technologies at the same time. The reason being is that JavaScript is a very versatile language. You can use it to code web pages, servers, and scripts on your computer. Because of this, there's so much to learn. If you're taking a university course or going through a boot camp, the first time that you're introduced to JavaScript, you're probably going to do the first 3 things on this list. You're going to have to learn DOM manipulation. At the same time, you're learning computer science and if statements and functions, all these different things. You're also, on top of that, learning HTML and CSS. Later on in your course, you're going to have to learn how to use web APIs, Node.js, all sorts of frameworks like Express and React, which are subjects in themselves. You're probably going to learn Bootstrap and jQuery. And then if you're taking a full stack developer course, you're probably even going to learn databases and SQL on top of that. There's just so much to learn. It's so complicated. Where do we even start? In this video, I want to give you a starting pattern with JavaScript to take in user input, do something, and output it. I have Visual Studio Code open to an empty project. Create a new index.html file. Next, we're going to generate our boilerplate by hitting the exclamation mark and hitting enter. I've done another video on this, but you can go into, if you don't have that, you can go into your extensions, search up HTML, and there's a extension called HTML boilerplate as of the recording of this video that I personally use, and I think it's really good. Next, inside of this, we're going to go into the body and we're going to create input fields. There's a trick in VS Code I want to show you. You can type input, and then there's all these different types here. And actually, I would take a second and kind of explore some of these. So for example, I could do like color, and we could do like input, date, password. And then we're going to go ahead and click the Go Live button down at the bottom. Again, that was this is from a previous video. If you don't have that extension, go to the extensions and search up Live Server. As of the recording this video, this is what I use for as a sort of development server that I can just use to view my HTML files. Let's go ahead and we'll click the Go Live button. And there we go. We actually have different input fields. So if you click this, it'll do a color picker. Yours will probably be different depending on what browser that you're using and also even what operating system you're using. But yeah, there's different input fields and they do different things. Feel free to explore as much as you'd like with these different types. There's several different kinds of input fields and there's ones that are really cool. Go ahead and delete those. To create our calculator, let's go ahead and start out with an H1 and we'll say calculator. I'm going to put this side by side so we can see what's going on. Next, we'll come in here and we'll do a input field and we'll say number. So I just, in VS Code, you can just do input number. And there we go. And we have an input field. We can type numbers into there if we want. Let's go ahead and also create another input field for the number. So now we have 2 that we can use. Next, these are what we call attributes in HTML. So for example, this is an input field, but if I type color in here instead, it's still an input, but now it's getting a color instead of a number. We have one attribute here, another attribute here, and another attribute here. So we have 3 in total. We have a type, name, and ID. They're each separated with spaces, and all of them are inside of these arrows here. Change this back to number. The ID allows us to find the element later. So I can come in here and give this an ID of A, and I can give this one an ID of B, for example. Now I'll be able to tell in my JavaScript later on the difference between these two. And I'll show you that here shortly. Next, we're going to create a button, and we're going to just have the button say add. You might notice in our browser here, these are lining up like so. To put this to the next line, you can put a break anywhere that you want. Notice now that the add button is on its own line. If I wanted to make these on their own line, I could put a break in between these. There's other ways of doing this, but this is one way that you can do this. It's also proper to create a label for each input field that you have. we use a for attribute, which basically links to the ID. So you say label for A and then ID A. If I click the label, check this out, it actually highlights this if you do that. Let's go ahead and create another label for B, and we'll say second number. You don't have to do this, but now we have these two labels, and generally speaking, input fields will have labels associated with them. Last thing that we need is we need a place to output the answer, and we can use a paragraph tag to do that. Our paragraph is going to be empty, but we're going to give this an ID as well. The ID should go here inside of the arrows, and we'll come in here, we'll say answer. I've tutored a number of students, and a common mistake that students make is they put the attribute inside of the tag like this. Now it's not inside of these arrows. So if you see that it's not lighting up, just make sure that the ID is inside of the arrows. We have all the HTML to get started with our calculator. Let's go ahead and go up to the top, and we'll create a new file called calculator.js. Go back to index.html, and what we're going to do is at the very end of the body, we're going to add a script tag. The script tag is going to get an attribute called src equals, and then the name of the JavaScript, so calculator.js. Jump up to calculator, and we're going to now actually write our JavaScript. The first thing is for us to get a reference to our input fields. Our JavaScript needs to find them on the page. To do that, we're going to declare a variable called first input equals, and then we're going to say document.querySelector. So this is going to look for something on the page. We'll talk about this in a second. Parentheses after it and quotes. And then we're going to say hashtag the ID that you used in your HTML. Let's go back. Let's go to index.html and let's take a look at it. So our input field that we have, the first one, is over here. We assigned it an ID of A. So we're going to come in here to our calculator.js, and we're going to do hashtag A to point to this input. Let's get a reference to the other one. Awesome. We've come in here, and now we have a reference to our second input as well. Now we need a reference to our add button. Let's go back to our index.html, and inside of the add button, I'm going to challenge you. I want you to add an ID to the button. I'll give you a hint. Go ahead and add it somewhere inside of here. Perfect. So now we've added our ID to the button. Just make sure that it's inside of the arrows. Again, this is a really common mistake that a lot of students make. Let's go into our calculator.js, and I want you to find our add button. The code will be very similar to up here. Use this as a reference. I'm going to challenge you to that. Find a reference to your add button. Perfect. Your code may look a little bit different than mine. Like, for example, you might have used a different variable. That's okay. But you should have done hashtag add. That's fine if you haven't. Go ahead and adjust this if you haven't, and then we'll move on from there. Last thing, we're going to find our answer paragraph. So on the HTML as well, there's also a paragraph with an ID of answer. Go ahead and jump into calculator.js, and I want you to find that. I challenge you to that. This is the completed code for finding the answer paragraph on the page. I named it answer box, but you might have a different, you probably have a different name for it. That's totally fine. Next, we're going to create a function that this button is actually going to call. A function is a block of code that you can call. All buttons in JavaScript are generally going to call some kind of function when you click them, right? Because otherwise, I mean, right now we're clicking the button, nothing happens. Let's create a function called add numbers. The function looks like this. You type function and then the name of the function, whatever you want to name it, and then parentheses, and then the curly brackets is the actual code of our function. So you put any of any of your code that's going to be put in here will basically be run whenever you call the function. Come up here to your add button, and let's go ahead and add another line after it. Take a look at this. We're going to call the add event listener. So what this code does is it says, when I click on the button, call this code, call this function. So every time I click on it, it's going to run the code inside of these curly brackets. First, we need to get the numbers out of these input fields. To do that, all we do is call our first input, right? It's our variable up here, right? This text field. We're going to say dot value. When you do dot, you're saying something inside of it. So first input's value, or for the text inside of first input. We're also going to do the same thing for the other one too as well. We're going to come in here and get the input from the second one. Next, this is actually just text. This is 50. These are just digits. The computer doesn't know about this as a number. Similar to if you read a book, the book really is just letters and words. You as a human go in and assign meaning to it. We're going to come in here and say let first number equal parse float first. So we're converting the first the input text, whatever the user wrote, into a float. A float is a number on the computer. It's a number with a decimal place. Don't worry too much about remembering that. That's totally fine at this point. But just know that, yeah, so this converts it to a number. We're now going to do the second one. We're going to get our second number that we did. So now we have two numbers. The computer knows about these as two numbers. Next, we're actually going to find the answer. So I declared a variable called answer number, and then we just do first number plus second number, and we'll just add those two together. If you run your code right now, let's come in here and we'll do 40 and 80 and we hit the add button. You'll notice nothing happens yet. It actually did all these calculations, but it didn't output it to the screen. And this is an important thing. Like, you can do a bunch of code and everything, but you may not actually see anything change yet unless you actually output something. You could be thinking about something in your head, but until you actually say it, nobody knows what you're thinking, right? It's the same thing with the computer. Let's output to this to the screen. Let's come in here and we'll say answer box equals inner HTML. You can actually change the HTML inside of an element. Check this out. Equals answer number. Let's now come in and run our code, and I'm going to hit the add button, and now it says 120. Really good job with this. Excellent job. So we have now coded a calculator that can take two numbers in. We click the button. That button calls this code. So calls this block of code, this function, and runs it. And it runs it every single time you click it. So if we come in here, we do 200, we click add, it'll run the code again, and it will do all of this. So to go over this, we get the user input, right? We come in here and we get user input, we do something with that input, and then we output it to the screen. So how do we get these to subtract numbers? Well, let's go into index.html, and you can create another button. For example, I'll make this bigger. You can create another button called subtract. Change the ID of it as well so that your JavaScript knows the difference between these two numbers. So we'll say subtract. Also, just make sure the spelling is good, because it just needs to be exact with your JavaScript. Let's go into your JavaScript, and we'll come in and we'll copy our add button code. Let's change everything here. So just change everything that we have subtract. So from add to subtract button, come in here, we'll do hashtag subtract. There are certainly better ways of doing this that may not be as repetitive, but as you're starting out, just go ahead and do this. This is fine. We'll create a function called subtract numbers. Feel free to copy this code right here. We can have another function. We'll name it subtract numbers, and we'll come in and just change this plus sign to a minus sign. Let's now come in and we'll run this. Let's come in and we'll click subtract, and there we go, and it actually subtracts something. Let's come in here, we'll click add, and it adds it. Congratulations, you created a calculator. What you see on the screen are basic operations you can do in JavaScript for each one of the like add, subtract, multiply, divide, and also even getting the remainder as well. So plus is for add, minus is for subtracting. The asterisk, the little star, is for multiplying. You find that it shares the 8 key on your keyboard. You can use a slash for dividing, similar to a fraction. It shares the question mark key on your keyboard. And then the modulo, to find the remainder, that shares the 5 key on your keyboard. You use the percent sign. The remainder is actually quite useful in programming for finding whether a number is like odd or even. There's actually quite a number of uses for the remainder function. It's actually very useful. With that being said, I have a challenge for you. I want you to add multiply, divide, and remainder buttons to this as well for practice. Just to give you some tips and pointers, you'll likely need other buttons to do that, and you can use copy paste if you want. You'll likely need to add the event listeners, right? So, just like you did with add button, subtract button. And you'll likely also need another function for this as well. Again, there's more elegant ways of coding this that may not be as copy paste oriented. But I think this is great to get you started. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.